Here with more on the subject is our grumpy old man.
This is the Grumpy Old Man Podcast, hosted by Dave Mathwin. So close your yapper and just listen.
Welcome everybody for another episode. So glad you could join us, and I am glad that joining me today are two guests, Mr. Trey Miller and Mr. Brandon Levy. Welcome, Trey and Brandon.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
Welcome, Brandon.
Glad to be here.
Now, I wanted to have you guys together for this conversation for a couple of different reasons. We're going to talk about kind of marketing and business, some of the ethics of it, some of our current cultural and the current cultural moment, and that I want to begin, though, by saying that I brought you two guys together. Now, Trey, I've known Trey for more than 25 years. You know, Brandon is a 2017 graduate of at Fontes Academy, where I teach. So we've got two guys from different generations, and no doubt, to some degree at least, some different perspectives and different experiences. So I'd love for our audience, of course I know you, but our audience does not. Brandon, let's start with you. Can you give our audience a brief biographical background and what you're doing now, where you want to go?
Yeah, so my name is Brandon Levy. I just turned 22 years old. And so I went to Fontes Academy, where I was taught by Mr. Mathwin as my history teacher, which was a great experience there. So after that, I ended up going to High Point University in North Carolina, and that's where I'm still studying right now. I'm actually a senior. And so, throughout that time, I ended up getting into social media marketing in kind of a roundabout way. But long story short, I basically manage a few artists' social media pages now, as well as some models and just different figures in general. I'm really focused on automation and really just helping artists grow their brands without them having to put so much of their own effort into it, so they can focus on making their music and doing whatever they do. And so, that's a little bit about me, and I'm planning on graduating here in December. So that's me.
Fantastic. Brandon, it's interesting that you manage musical artists because you yourself had a brief flirtation with a music career.
Yes, I did. That's what led me down the path of eventually being involved in social media marketing, just linking up with some guys who were doing it for me, and they kind of taught me how it worked, and I thought, hey, this stuff looks like something I could probably do. And so once I grew my page, I started helping other people grow theirs. Yeah.
Excellent. Wonderful. Trey, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're at now.
Well, I'm a husband and a father of two. My wife, Lori, and I have two boys, Huck, who's 14, and Gus, who's 10. I grew up in the kind of in that huge suburb between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Dave, I think we were not too far apart growing up.
Right. That's true.
But we didn't meet until we both wound up at Grove City College in the 90s. I was a really solid C student at Grove City. I consider myself an engineer who's bad at math. So I started off as an electrical engineering major and got a 35 out of 100 on my first Calc 2 exam, and switched to business administration the next day.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
added a religion major while I was there as well. But yeah, not a great student, but I do think maybe because of that, I've tried to become a lifelong learner, and maybe one of the most unusual ways that I've learned is by a series of failed attempts at various careers. So I've had about literally 32 or 33 jobs in my life going back to third grade. And maybe because some of those early jobs were fairly, I guess entrepreneurial was the word back, is the word now, and would have been the word if could have pronounced it back then. But yeah, I've just looked for a long time for the thing I want to do when I grow up. And about 15 years ago, I got laid off from what I kind of think of as hopefully my last real job. And with Huck, our 14-year-old, just about to be born, it was just kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to either go look for another paycheck or start something on my own. So I started at the time a marketing agency that really didn't take off at all. So another failure along the career path that I've had. But out of that came an IT services business that I've sort of transformed into, and have been growing that since for about 14 years now.
Thank you, Trey. So, yeah, I think we'll have, I look forward to hearing you guys' thoughts. I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss. So, Brandon, you went to a classical, high school. Trey, your family is involved in a classical school down in North Carolina.
That's right.
So, you guys have some familiarity with the classical approach. And so you may or may not be aware of that, the classical tradition and like business, marketing, merchants, and so on. It's the relationship between the two has always been, well, at best, I think, tenuous. The basic critique of marketing and business, I think, runs something like this. You attempt, any merchant, right? So a farmer, right, I'll start maybe with that. Like the classical tradition loves farmers, right? So farmers, right, you do your own thing, you grow your own food. There's a kind of natural relationship between your work and the product of that work, or the result of that work. You create something that has a very tangible need, food, or maybe you turn the flax that you grow into, you weave things out of it or what have you. Tradesmen too develop, shall we say, an art or a skill, a technique that manufactures things. So there's a connection, right, between your work and the product you make, and when you sell that product, you have a direct relationship between the creation of the product and the people you sell it to. But Plato, I mean, maybe, well, let's just say, right, the classical tradition in general. When you're a merchant, you don't really have a connection to the goods, and your goal is simply profit. Well, at least that's, the critique, right? The profit motive, number one, you're disconnected from what you're selling. Number two, you don't really have a connection with the person you're selling to. So number three, that means your motive can be profit, which can be seen as exploitation in some way. It's a kind of unnatural way. And contrary to farming or being a tradesman, being someone who is a kind of middleman seller of goods or services, it's unnatural and thus bad for us. What would you say? What's your defense for business? Trey, we'll start with you. One of the bloggers, economics bloggers that I think we both enjoyed, Tyler Cowen, recently wrote a book in praise of big business.
Yeah, a love letter to big business.
A love letter to big business, that's right, yes. So Trey, you've been involved with big businesses. You started your own business. What is your response to the basic classical critique of business merchants in general?
You mentioned a number of things there. I guess one of the things that kept coming up in my mind is what are the alternatives? What mechanism or market system would be an alternative to what developed over, I guess, hundreds of years from when things were strictly agrarian and when the only real tradesmen were what would they have been building back then? I guess homes, cathedrals, and horseshoes or something. I mean, you're the historian, so I don't know. But I mean, I think at some point you go from most people living in a subsistence model where they sort of do the same thing every day and don't have a whole lot saved up or a lot of hope for anything different tomorrow than what they had yesterday. And I'm speaking purely in a kind of material and possession sense. I mean, obviously there are, philosophical and spiritual elements to this discussion, but if you want to get past subsistence, what are the alternatives to some sort of a market-based relationship between people who want things that they can't produce or create on their own, and people who have the means or the creativity or whatever it is to develop and sell those things?
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks. That's a good opening response. Brandon, what's your initial take on that basic critique?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I want to say, of course, there are different types of marketers and salespeople and, those type of people out there. I think there's a few different ways you can look at it. You can look at the marketer as, this person who comes in and capitalizes on, something other people made basically for profit. Or you can look at them as really the bridge between a need and the person supplying the thing to fill that need. And I think that's what good marketers and salespeople do. A lot of times, well, not a lot of times, all the time, you really need somebody to fill that space because, you could create the best thing ever, but if you don't know how to get it in front of people and find the people who need that thing, it's not going to be any good, right? So I think it really depends on how you look at it. Like I said, there's different types of people in those roles, but I think it's really something that needs to happen. And like Trey said, what's the alternative to that if that's somehow unethical or isn't fair in some way?
Yeah, Brandon, I don't know how much you might remember of Plato's Republic, but Plato talks about, like he said, okay, let's imagine this state that we've got. And, you're right. You're both correct. He says, like, it can't be just one person. Like, the state obviously has to be one person, more than one person, because you can't do everything. You're not good at everything. And in fact, he argues that you shouldn't be good at everything. That's actually probably not only just impossible, but you should hone in and have a thing that you do. But, for him, the tension was, okay, so we'll need a couple people. Someone's going to farm. Someone's going to hunt. Someone's going to, but when we get merchants that bring in goods from other places, what's going to happen? We're going to keep on wanting more. And it's going to, basically, I think he seems to argue, yeah, we kind of need merchants, but at the same time, they are bad for us. All right, we're back there. We lost Brandon for a second, but here we are again. So as I was saying, Plato says, what's going to happen? The merchant will come back. He'll have things that you don't really need and you never really thought you needed, but then, right, you'll need them. And then you'll want more. And basically, Plato talks about this kind of inflaming, this expansion of our needs, unnatural expansion of our needs. You didn't think you needed turquoise, silk before, but now that you had a taste for it, now you do. And so this expansion of things, he says, will eventually lead to conflict within and without the state. What would your response be to this idea that marketers create, sure, there can be a natural kind of service they can do, but marketers, businesses, to stay afloat, have to kind of create needs that aren't really there. What would you say to that? Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, here's the thing is I'm not sure. I know that businesses do that. They definitely do create needs, but I'm not sure that that's something that you necessarily need to do. And I'm not sure that honestly, I'm not sure that's ethical, to really create need where there is none. Now, there are products that, of course, you don't need, that people still sell. However, people are also willing to buy things that aren't really a necessity, but that they would like to have. And so at the end of the day, I think that purchasing decision is always in the hands of the buyer at the end of the day. But to me, I think that almost be more of a critique on capitalism, because I mean, people are always going to create things in order to make more money. And there's an unlimited number of things you can create, most of which people don't actually need. So, I think it's a tricky argument. And I think it involves more things than just marketing. But I definitely see your point there. But I don't think it's ethical to create need when really there is none. You should look, I think, to fill the needs that are there.
So to get back to our merchant, circa 400 BC, everybody lives just fine and dandy without purple silk. Suddenly, Joe the merchant, or Pericles the merchant or whatever, comes back. Ah, look at purple silk. Purple silk, here it is, isn't it nice? And you think, oh, yes, it's nice. And then you think, I want more purple silk. He didn't create the need out of thin air, but you didn't. I guess I think that's kind of Plato's. He's not inventing something. You need this to live. He's not saying that, but he's introducing you to something that you don't, quote, need. And there's, of course, millions of things that we don't need at all. What do you think about that sort of practice? I mean, that seems to be what businesses do. An iPhone, you didn't need an iPhone until they made an iPhone. You didn't need email until they made email, and so on. What are your thoughts there?
Dave, I gotta say, I'm not a student of history. I'm so comforted by the fact that this is a 2,500-year-old problem. That this isn't a problem unique to 21st century America or even 20th century America.
Not at all.
I think that's, to me, that's very comforting. And I guess I think of, maybe an economic concept like scarcity, and the idea that when there's no such thing as purple silk, it doesn't even enter into the imagination. But now when you introduce purple silk into the culture, it exists, but not only does it exist, it exists in probably very scarce quantities. And what could be more valuable to somebody who already has everything they need, but something that's new and scarce. Right. And then I think of things like how to signal status. I'm sure that I'm sure as part of the human condition, we've probably always needed ways to elevate ourselves above the people around us, and we've probably always sought to stand out as being higher status than at least someone, if not everyone. Maybe that's been kind of a struggle for part of the human condition for a long time. And I guess I think of this concept of drumming up needs or creating needs out of nothing. I think it points me back to the role, as you alluded to, Brandon, that there's a role that the individual, in your illustration, Dave, the purchaser or the consumer, needs to practice some form of self-care, soul care, and have some form of discipline or narrative for themselves as to who they are with or without this object, who they are with or without this new technology or whatever it is that Dave, you're suggesting they want really badly but maybe don't truly need. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's obviously complicated, but those are some of the thoughts that kind of bounce around my head as you're spinning this narrative.
Brandon, any thoughts?
No, I agree. I basically agree.
So Trey, Brandon, you both brought up this role of the individual. And, if the individual wants to, you know, whatever, spend lots of money on purple silk, let him spend money on purple silk. That's his life, his choice, his money. That argument makes a lot of sense. And if it's a bad choice for him to do that, well, then it's his choice. We wouldn't think of holding the merchant accountable, the purple silk merchant, holding him accountable for the bad choices that the buyer made. And yet we do that sometimes with some products. For example, with drugs, at least most drugs, the user, we say, is essentially the victim. Users may face some kind of punishment, but usually not, or a smaller one. The seller, he faces the big, or she, whatever. The seller faces the punishment. We hold the seller accountable for selling the bad product, the product that is bad for the person, not the buyer. I guess, do you think that is, like, okay, so you would say, well, heroin isn't purple silk. That's true. But, but I guess there's a continuum. There's a continuum.
Sure.
So,
and there are there's a number of legal products that need to be manufactured in a safe way. So think of cars are an easy example, right? If you're a car manufacturer and you produce a model year and make and model that has a particular issue with the brakes, you can't just when you discover that, you can't just hope that people get by on the brakes they have. You issue a recall and you're held responsible and you bear the cost of that. So sure, there are many, I would think any consumer product, what is it, the Consumer Product Safety Commission or something,
right,
oversees things like that and ensures that the seller is held responsible for selling safe products.
Right. So I guess, our products are safe. We say purple silk. That's a safe product.
Yeah. You're not hung up on safety. You're hung up on,
I'm not hung up on
utility and need, I guess.
Utility, need. Now, I'll admit, I'm being a little bit of a devil's advocate. I don't have firmly settled opinions on this. I'm kind of blown about by the wind. I'm sympathetic to the individual's responsible arguments, certainly sympathetic to Plato and others also. So I don't know where I stand exactly here. But I do think it is interesting that we don't, well, it's also true that we don't always know what we're doing. No one thought, I think, that the internet would transform society as it has. And it's transformed us in good ways and bad ways. And now, if it's been bad overall, too bad for us because we can't go back. I don't know what you do about that problem. But I do wonder about, do I want to go back and live in, 3000 BC or whatever? And no, not really. So, I don't know what we do about that. I do think it is an interesting question. The ethics of selling. Let me present to you an ancient question, a question raised by Cicero, the Roman statesman, that was commented on, I believe, by Thomas Aquinas, the medieval theologian. You have a town where there's been drought and they have no food. Now you have a grain merchant guy, and he's got a bunch of grain or a bunch of food or whatever, and he's coming into the town. Naturally, people are very hungry. They're going to want that grain, and that grain's going to be in high demand. He can sell it for a high price. But that merchant knows that about a half a day behind him are 10 other grain merchants that are traveling to the same town. This grain merchant, he enters the town. When he sells for a price, the price he sets, can he morally set a price as if he's the only game in town, Or does he have to take into account the fact that, in a half a day, in 10 hours or whatever, there's going to be a lot of other competitors and the price is going to go down? What do you guys think?
Brandon probably already knows the right answer because he studied this years ago under you, I'm sure.
We did
I'll
not.
take a stab at it.
Raising this question, but Brandon, go ahead. You can take the first crack at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just make sure that I understand exactly what the question is here. So really, the question is, would it be unethical for him to charge a high or a higher amount for said product, knowing that in a day there's going to be a lot more competition, which is going to drive price down?
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah, that's a tough one because, I mean, technically speaking, as far as that day goes, he is the only one in town. I mean, so, but now he knows that there is competition coming, but I think from a business standpoint, I think you would say, well, you wouldn't price it, you wouldn't lower your price to what you think the price is going to be, because think about you build a business, right? And you build something new, right? And of course it's going to be mimicked if it's successful. Okay. And say maybe it's going to take a year for somebody to mimic it, maybe 6 months. You wouldn't say, well, let me drive my price down now because there's going to be more competition in a year, and it wouldn't be fair for me to, charge these people so much when, you would be like, well, I'm the only one right now offering it. So, I'm going to charge for the service what I believe it's worth. And, regardless, even if there is competition, who's to say my service isn't worth more than theirs? So I think it's a tricky question. But that's kind of.
So you'd say it's perfectly fine to sell at a higher price, and then if the other guys come, you'll probably lower your prices.
Yeah, and I'd like to say one more thing,
Sure.
which is that I think a lot of this depends on what information does the buyer have, because I actually just want to go back to that example that you made about with drugs, right?
Right.
And, here's the thing about that is that we only, by law, we only consider the user, the victim, if they didn't have all of the information, right? For example, a pharmaceutical company makes a drug.
Right.
Someone takes it, they have a bad reaction, they die. It's too bad, right? Because if it's explained that this is a possibility, right? When you do this and you have all of that information as the buyer, even as a patient, you then run that risk, right? Now it's different if you take a drug and you have a heart attack and it didn't say that was something that could happen, right? And if the buyer is not aware, then that's an ethical problem, right? And a legal problem. So I think it depends on what does the buyer know? Are you being upfront with the buyer, and do they have all the information they need to make an intelligent purchasing decision?
Yeah, I think Brandon's hitting on an important point. In your illustration, Dave, or Cicero's illustration that you've borrowed from him, there's asymmetry in the information available, right? So the merchant knows something that the buyers don't. And, one way I guess I would answer your question is, what kind of merchant does he seek to be? In my business, and I think in all of my life, I've tried to look at relationships as kind of falling into one of two categories. Relationships are either personal or they're transactional. And even a purely transactional relationship, which is the one I have with the woman at the grocery store who I probably won't see again next time I check out. She's ringing up my groceries and I swipe my credit card and I'm done. That's about as purely transactional as it can get, but I still want to be kind to that person and I want to be respectful of someone who's doing an important job. So even in a purely transactional relationship, I wouldn't want to take advantage of that person in some way, even if I could. In your merchant illustration, if he wants to have a purely transactional relationship with all of his buyers, then I don't think he has anything to lose by trying to maximize the price he can get on a Monday, especially if he knows that there are more suppliers coming by on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. However, he would need to do that with a willingness to give up the potential relationships that he otherwise could have had with those buyers. If he wanted to be a merchant who was coming back every Monday, then I think he would probably want to consider a different pricing model, so that he could earn trust and build relationships and have personal relationships with his buyers. I don't know. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, that's a good I think that's a fair qualification. Do you think the merchant has the obligation to say, look, there are people, there'll be other people here in a day.
No,
I'm here now.
well, the way I would say it is, prices are signals, as we know from our mutual friend, Peter Frank, right? And so if economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources with alternative uses, one of the key mechanisms that we use to allocate resources is prices, right? And so if he says, if he has a unit of grain, let's say a day's supply of grain that cost him $1, and he thinks he can get $10 for that day's supply of grain, then he's going to sell it. But someone's probably unlikely to buy 10 days worth of grain for $10 a day. If they can buy like a day's worth today and wait till tomorrow and see what happens tomorrow. Maybe I'll have the money for another day's worth tomorrow. And so I think he's free to set the price that he thinks is sustainable, and then he lives with the consequences. We see price gouging every once in a while in the U.S. And when a hurricane's coming, or I mean, most recently, I guess it was paper towels and toilet paper during the early days of the pandemic, and no one likes a price gouger, right? But that's, I think, based on the reason most people see a moral problem with price gouging is they want to develop long-term personal relationships with the people that they're selling to. And if you were a guy who had a semi full of paper towels and you just stopped on the side of the road and you were selling them for $10 a roll because you're going to be on to the next town, a day later, then that's a whole different situation. And I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but with very few, if any, exceptions, like people are free to just not buy paper towels or not buy grain. Grains, feels a little different because it's probably their sustenance for the day or whatever. But in general, most people are free to wait a day. Most people are free to wait a week to buy things.
Yeah, it's interesting, like you were saying, like if you're this kind of merchant, maybe you're like a traveling merchant, you travel all up and down the Mediterranean, or do you live in the town? Right. Yeah, it would probably influence your approach there. And again, though, this kind of harkens back to one of the critiques, right, of that traveling merchant is like inevitably he has no, quote, natural relationships. It's all this consistent,
right,
rootless transactional life isn't a real, quote, human life, I suppose they might say. What is interesting is, Cicero and Thomas Aquinas, I believe, disagreed on this. And it might be surprising to know that Thomas Aquinas thought that it was okay for the merchant to sell at a higher price. And Cicero thought no. Thomas Aquinas thought no because, Thomas Aquinas thought that it was okay, I should say, because you're there now. And as some of you guys said, you're the game in town now. Now, the arrival of the merchants the next day is probable, but not certain. It is unknown. Yep. It is a thing, in a sense, that doesn't exist yet. The merchants in that town, that is not real. So what is interesting is Thomas Aquinas, I think he's an interesting person for different reasons. He's kind of hearkening back to the past with Aristotle. He sees the kind of future that is coming in certain respects with banking and the new medieval economy. And he's trying to maintain a foothold in both worlds. For him, the higher price at that moment is natural because it is real, right? It is real that he is there. It is not real that the merchants are there. I don't know. Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting sort of dance between these two sorts of perspectives. Do you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, and I was thinking something along those lines when you had first asked me. I just really didn't know how to verbalize it, so thank you for doing that, because there is no guarantee that those merchants are going to be there tomorrow, right? But I really like what Trey said about, you're not obligated, right, to tell the people that these merchants are coming. But what kind of relationship do you want to build? For example, I ordered some food the other day from this restaurant, and I was going to pick it up, and I ended up having to go somewhere else. So I called and said, hey, can you take my order away? Can I get my money back, basically, right? I'm not going to come to pick up the food. I'm not even sure I asked them if I could get a refund, but they didn't refund me, right? They said, well, you ordered it, we're going to charge you. So again, were they obligated to give me a refund? No, they weren't obligated to give me a refund. I ordered it, but I'll never go there again.
Right.
Right. And so they made $10 off of me, but they could have made, who knows, $50, $60 down the road, maybe this year, had they done something differently there, maybe refunded me, right? So again, I'm not mad at them, but I just probably won't shop with them, and I probably won't refer them to anybody else. But that's their choice, and they profited $10. Same thing with that merchant. He could do that, but how much business is he going to have in the future? What are his relationships going to be like there? Probably not too strong, right?
Right. I think that is one of the critiques about business in general is the transactional nature of it, and the and the kind of faceless, nameless nature of it, which alienates people, as this particular instance alienated you, Brandon. Trey, how do you, as a business owner, small business owner, where do you draw the line between transactional relationships, personal relationships? What's the balance for you in your line of work?
I think in my life in general, I try to cultivate as many personal relationships as I reasonably can. I mean, I think we all have only a certain amount of capacity, and that varies by person. But I think I've just always been, maybe it's my dad's kind of influence on me, but I've just always been the kind of guy who is going to ask a friend or two before I call a plumber. I'm not going to go to the Yellow Pages to look up plumbers, or I guess Yelp or whatever
Right. Probably not Yellow Pages anymore.
Who's the grumpy old man now?
Exactly.
No, but I think I've always just naturally been drawn to making decisions based on personal connections and personal relationships. And I'm fortunate to be in a business where I think, and in a market where I think a lot of what gets done still gets done based on just well-developed personal relationships, and doing good quality work for a client tends to lead over time to more opportunities to do work for the same client, and then opportunities to do work for other people that they know. So that's kind of been my approach, and that's worked pretty well so far.
Brandon, in your studying of marketing and the various, already, the jobs that you've had for yourself, or, how do you see that relationship between transactional and personal, and what is your recommendation for businesses? I guess, does it matter if you're IBM or, an 11, 12 person company? What are your thoughts there?
And can I add something to that, Dave?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm really curious, Brandon, you mentioned automation, which obviously is a big deal in every industry. I'm really curious how, you do what you do in building what I kind of picture social media marketing and that world as sort of building authentic, direct personal relationships between, an entertainer or a model or whoever and some audience. So a one-to-many where authenticity and personal touch is preserved. I'd love to hear how you kind of walk that fine line between doing that at scale and using automation to do that without losing the authenticity and the personal, as you said, Dave, the personal element.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And I think I can answer both of you guys' questions at the same time here. So yeah, of course, I think personal relationships are huge, especially with the type of people I work with, generally like artists, models, people who have really what are fan bases, but also customers. And, you can't beat personal, authentic interaction, right? I mean, that's the
Right.
best thing you can do. I'll just go into a short example here. There was a kid who I saw on social media the other day who had probably one of the best ads I think I've ever seen, and it was so simple. He was a kid who made his own clothes, and he was just sitting there, and he goes, "Hey, my name's Brian. I make clothes. Here they are. Here's my sewing machine. This is something I'm really passionate about. I spent some money to get this ad out here to you guys. Hope you guys like it." The ad went viral because
Nice.
it had this authenticity, right, that you just don't see, especially from big companies, right? And this kid wasn't a big company. This was just a solo kid. But anyway, I commented and I said, and I never comment on ads. I said, "This was a really good ad. This kid actually took the time to go through my page, find something I was passionate about, which is music." And I had it far back in my page, and he said, "Thanks, keep making the great music." And I was like, wow, he has me as a lifetime customer now. And still to this day, it was probably months ago, I still follow him, I still comment on all this stuff. So my point is, like, now that's an advantage that small guys have over big business, because big business can't do that, of course, all the time. But to get back to the point, the only problem with that is it's not very scalable, right? How do you scale personal interaction? It's hard. And so what I kind of aim to do is kind of to do that. And my tool for that is automation. Now, it's a great conversation because can you have automated processes while also being authentic, right? Tough question, because you can implant some of yourself in that automation, right? Your personality, it's something that you wrote, right? Say it's a message that's getting automatically sent out to people who follow you. You can write that message and craft it, and that is you, but it's just being sent out automatically, right? And so that's a tough conversation, and I think there's a fine line there between what's authentic and what is, not so authentic. But there's nothing stopping you from having a personal relationship with that person once the automation catches their attention. And so it's definitely a fine line, though, for sure. But that's kind of the goal, is to scale personal interaction in a way that makes sense and that's not unethical.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, you've hit upon something that is a challenge for big companies. I think some big companies have managed to do it. People talk about like Chick-fil-A, and how they have seemingly are more personal. I remember stopping, on a trip or whatever, and I stopped at a McDonald's, and got the food, whatever, went to ring it up with a credit card. The credit card machine didn't work. The guy said, "Oh, please take your food. We'll handle this problem." I said, Sure. I said, "I'll ring it up on another machine if you'd like." And said, No, don't worry about it. I came back about 10 minutes later, said the machine fixed, happy to pay for it. And they said, "You know what? Sorry for your trouble. Don't worry about it." And this was at a McDonald's. And I thought, wow, that's pretty nice. That was, that's $20 or whatever that they, the thing was, though, this was a McDonald's located like right off the highway. Like I would go there again, but I'm not gonna ever go there again. I can't remember even where it was. So that's a tough thing, right? Because this McDonald's right off the rest stop just did a nice thing, and I just off the freeway, I would go there again, but I'm not going to. Is it really to their advantage to do that? because the vast majority, I think, of their business would be people coming off the highway. It's a tough call. But the Chick-fil-A in town, sure, you might go there again, obviously. Yeah, that is.
Dave, I think you're.
Go ahead.
I think that's an experience that, obviously it could be a number of things. Guy could have been lazy, didn't want to ring you up on another register. But I think you're hitting on something. This is funny. I don't know if it's funny or not, but I Googled marketing maybe an hour or so before this conversation because I just want to make sure I have some idea of what we're talking about. And the Wikipedia page for marketing is fascinating. I mean, it's, there's 1,000 different kinds of marketing. And I think implicitly one of the first that kind of comes to people's minds is brand marketing, which is sort of, it's not necessarily making you want a particular kind of car. It's impressing upon you that BMW is, the ultimate driving machine, and if you see yourself as a certain kind of person, then brand marketing is what's going to help solidify your identity with certain companies, right? And so let's assume the guy wasn't just being lazy. What he may have done at that McDonald's was live out some cultural principle or cultural priorities that McDonald's from a corporate level, and I know McDonald's, most of them are independently operated and owned, but there may be something culturally from the McDonald's parent company that goes down to the store level that says, if we're slowing somebody, we're fast food, right? So if I'm sorry, quick serve, I think is what they call it now.
Right.
But not fast food, Jerry. Good food quickly. Is that what Kenny Rogers?
Kenny Rogers Roasters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But so they're fast food, right? And so if they're slowing you down with their machine that doesn't work, maybe their cultural identity says the most important thing is good food fast, and if we're in their way, we're going to give it to them, and so you may not go back to that particular restaurant again because it's inconvenient for you, but it's the opposite of the experience Brandon had at the local restaurant recently, right? And so it's certainly going to elevate your esteem for the McDonald's brand, right? It's going to, at some margin, it's going to nudge you towards it's McDonald's or KFC on an exit, on an off ramp, and you're going to kind of maybe go to McDonald's,
Yeah, if that experience is repeated, sure. I think some companies do a good job of scaling that experience up enough so that it creates that. Brandon, do you have any comment?
No.
All right, great. Well, for our last segment, I wanted to ask you guys about, shall we say, how marketing may be, or business may be shifting in our current cultural climate. So we're recording this near the end of August, and when this airs, it's hard to say where things may be. But, so with that caveat in mind, we do see many businesses, perhaps because of perception of being kind of crass or inauthentic or out of touch, starting to align themselves, at least in some kind of surface way, with various trends in our culture. And I don't know what you guys think of these trends. Maybe you're in favor of them or not in favor, or in favor of some and not of others. And you're welcome to comment on that. But also I'd like your thoughts on, how should a business react to a particular cultural mood, a particular cultural drift? How much do you stay the course? How much do you tack to the culture? And I guess this too could maybe relate to how much, what is a company's identity, and how much of identity do you need to stay firm, and how much do you need to adjust or blow as the wind or move as the wind blows in certain directions. Trey, you have your own company that you're running right now, and I guess you may have certain thoughts, and customers may have certain thoughts, employees may have certain thoughts.
Sure.
So I know a lot of moving parts to that question, but how would you respond basically with where you think, to the questions I've asked. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned identity, and I think that's a good place to start. I think on a personal level, but also at a company level, I think of our company, Triad Tech Services. I think of the clients that we serve. We've tried. I've always tried from the beginning to be a company that knows, who we are, has a mission and a purpose for a reason for existing, and has a strong, like a clear vision of a future in which we've made some sort of impact. So I don't want to say that we're out to change the world through IT services delivered to the Triad. I think I'm not as grandiose as that, but I do see us performing a valuable service for our clients, and we exist to sort of take technology out of the way of our clients' progress. Where technology is slowing them down, we want to move it out of the way and take care of it so that they can get on with running their business. We want to use technology where appropriate to help propel their businesses forward, to help them grow and flourish. And if their goal is to get here in 5 years, we want to help use technology to get them there. And we want to do that by providing what we call calm, kind service. So we want people who are on our team are calm and kind, and of course we're competent. Like it wouldn't do to be incompetent at our jobs, but we think we can differentiate ourselves by being the kind of people that you want on the other end of the phone when you're having a technology crisis. So I think when you know who you are, then it's a lot easier to decide how to respond or react in various circumstances, right? And I think a lot of businesses over the past 6 months or so have been through a sink or swim situation. And I think of some industries, in particular travel and hospitality and food and beverage. It's still there are many businesses, of course, that are not going to survive the current circumstances. But there are also a number of businesses that are thriving through this situation because, I was going to mention this concept earlier about one man's margin is another man's opportunity, right? So like the merchant who wants to make 1,000% profit can be undercut by the guy who's willing to make just 300% profit or whatever. Mm-hmm. And likewise, at times of great uncertainty like this, I think it's the agile and the quick to respond and the flexible and the resilient organization and individual that can actually thrive through a time like that. And I don't know if that sounds flippant towards those who are, like if you're running a small restaurant right now, you have a lot of cards stacked against you. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying, well, like figure out a more creative way to be a restaurant right now. There's certainly limits to these things. But that's kind of what I see happening. And we've tried to be resilient and respond to our clients' changing needs over the last few months, and hopefully we can continue to do that.
Do any clients ask you about, we see a lot, politically or whatever, do any clients ask you about, well, what is your position on, equality, justice, and so forth? Is that a factor in how you have to? Go ahead.
No, not directly. I think we've tried to, and if you looked at our website, it's kind of embarrassingly simplistic, and there's not a whole lot of information there. But I think that gets back to an earlier question about, the kinds of relationships we're cultivating. I think our clients who know us as people, with whom we've developed personal relationships, they almost wouldn't have to ask, because I think they know that our desire at a fundamental level is to treat everyone with dignity and respect, and actually I think we may even use the word love on our website somewhere. Like we genuinely love each other, the members of our team, and we love the people we serve. And that's probably a weird concept, and I'm sure it's not always quite true, but it's our goal to treat people in a loving way and to be kind to them, and like I said, treat them with dignity and respect. So I don't know, maybe we should have a statement that kind of expressly and explicitly speaks to the cultural moment we're in. But on the other hand, maybe the way we've behaved over the last 10 years is kind of like maybe if we just continue to behave consistently with the way we've been behaving for the last 10 or 15 years, people will continue to see that we care.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying basically, whether, there's things are in a leftward direction or in a rightward direction, hopefully you craft an identity that that can weather that. And so you don't have to, you don't have to.
That's right.
It's implicit in your ethos rather than having to be, okay.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm thinking of, the Black Lives Matter movement that has been on the rise for quite a while, and for which we, hopefully, like I said, we as a team have shown enough love to the people that we interact with that it shouldn't be any question where we would stand on something like that. If it's, kind of partisan politics, thank God we don't people just don't ask, and I don't like to talk about politics no matter what, so let alone it, in some client situation or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Brandon, you're younger than both of us, obviously, by a good bit. Do you have, what's your thoughts or perspective on this?
Yeah. So when I think about what's going on right now, I mean, both, politically and with the virus stuff as it pertains to business. I like the quote, Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan. And I think that's what's going on right now is I think people and businesses are getting hit with a storm of, aggression in a lot of different ways and pressures, societal pressures, like I said, what we have going on with the virus. And I just really feel like a lot of them they got hit, and now all of a sudden they are losing. They don't know what to do. Like it's just like being in a fight. All of a sudden you get hit, you lose your form, you start doing things that you wouldn't regularly do, that you didn't practice. You start flailing, right? And for example, if you're a company who has never really involved yourself in social justice and or in whatever the pressure is that's coming, right? And suddenly this happens and you jump out of your comfort zone and you try and do something that's that you think is going to appease this pressure. I think you're gonna get yourself into trouble there. And I think that's where it really comes in, where you need to have really strong values that you can hold on to during a time like this, so that you're not just getting pushed, all about. But I think that's what happens in these types of situations.
Yeah.
Is panic. They don't know how to react. And I'll use an example of, and this is not meant to be, everybody has their own opinions about the virus. I'm just using this as an example, but the way that most of the world has reacted to this virus, right? It's like we got hit, and this is not how we usually react to danger. I mean, historically, just as human beings, right? The way we typically react to dangers like this is, okay, for example, we'll take cars, for example. We know they're dangerous. A lot of people die from them every year, right? Tons. But we say, okay, the way we usually deal with danger, whether it was horses, cars, whatever it was, guns, we always said, well, this is useful for this, and this reason. We kind of need to do this, and this. So we'll deal with it. And, we're not going to cut the speed limit down to 10 miles an hour. We're not going to, we're going to, take our losses to some extent. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying that's the way that we generally, that's the process of dealing with danger. Now we got hit and all of a sudden we flailed, right? We're doing stuff we never do. And I think the same type of thing is happening here with a lot of businesses and public figures. They got hit and they're losing their form, and they're just trying to do whatever they can do to stay afloat right now.
Yeah, Brandon, that's an interesting point you make. So locally, I find that I live in the DC area, and I grew up in the DC area, so that meant I'm a fan of the Washington football team. Of course, their name will be changed now. And again, let's not get into should it be changed, should it not be changed. one thing that I think is absolutely certain, though, is that Dan Snyder, the owner of the formerly known as Washington Redskins, Dan Snyder, when this crisis hit, he flailed. He flailed. And he wasn't seen as a person, rightly or wrongly, and well, for whatever, he wasn't seen as a person in touch with the people. A good guy, a generous guy. He was always viewed as one of the worst owners in the NFL. And he would do things. He would make donations to Native Americans organizations, or have Native Americans, show up at halftime and wave to the crowd or something like that. It was so obviously flailing.
I think he shut down the Big Chief Crazy Cone ice cream shop that used to be in the stadium, right? Didn't he?
Right. So this is another, Brandon. I don't know. This is another.
No. Brandon wasn't born when that probably first
right,
aired.
but it's a Simpsons episode.
Sure.
Yeah, this is Trey and I's cultural language.
That's right.
Brandon, I encourage you. I think seasons 3 through 12 of The Simpsons were fantastic.
Yes.
But anyway, so
sorry, I derailed you.
Sorry, that's okay. You're right, though, because I wonder if another owner, might have done, whether the name might have stuck. But no one likes Dan Snyder. Everyone sees him as flailing around to hire coaches, flailing around to hire, to bring in free agents, flailing with the team name question. That's a great point. I wonder if some people will see, companies with a good identity, whether they need to make any statements at all. Companies maybe with a not identity, whether their statements will be accepted or rejected by the public. It will be interesting. It will be interesting to see. And what is also interesting is the weight that some companies have now. We see an interesting term where companies are starting to become a little bit more political. Not every company, of course, but a little bit more, injecting themselves a little bit more politically. And the rumor was that Snyder eventually caved on the name question because Nike and maybe other brands weren't going to sell their merchandise. As a final, brief segment here, what do you guys think of this move of some companies to become a little bit more engaged, culturally aware, we might just say? Do you see this as helpful, perhaps, as a way to become authentic, as a way to engage with people? Do you see it as foolish, maybe flailing around, or maybe something in between? What do you guys think?
What's an example, Dave?
Go ahead.
What's an example of the?
Well, let's say the Nike putting pressure on Snyder as an example. And other companies may have done the same thing. From what I heard, Nike for sure was putting pressure.
Well, I'd say, and I don't want to go political here. I really don't. But I will say.
You can. It's up to you. Go ahead if you'd like.
Let's call this, I think, what it is, which is, it's part of what bothers me about this culture right now and what's going on with businesses is, let's just be honest, this is really nothing more than an angry mob pressuring business owners into saying and doing things that they otherwise probably wouldn't have. If anybody feels a certain way about social justice, about police brutality, whatever it may be, you've had the last who knows how many years to say something about it. Let's not act like this is, something that people are, and part of the trickiness of it is that, I think this is pretty obvious, but if you say something, quote unquote, political in one direction, it's not really viewed as political, it's viewed as just, whether it's human rights, whatever you want to call it, you're just doing the right thing. You're just being
You're part of the mainstream.
Yeah, but if you go in another direction, suddenly it becomes political, right? And so, especially, with these big social media sites, which I think have way too much unregulated power right now anyway, especially if they have an agenda, you just run into problems where I think there's just a lot of pressure on companies to act a certain way, and I think we're kind of turning a blind eye to it and acting as if they're authentically just choosing to go, to me, it's a bit ridiculous to me. But I mean, I say props to any company, business, or business owner who is sticking to their core values, whatever side you're on. If you're being consistent right now, and then I think you're going to be around for a long time, and I think it will eventually show as we look back through the years, hopefully 20, 30 years from now, and we say, wow, they really, because the culture will shift, and it will shift back and forth.
Right.
And we will see who's just following that line, right? And it's probably going to be most of them. So I think that's going to be really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing that 20 years from now. But props to the ones who are sticking to what they believe in, no matter what that is.
Very good. Trey, your thoughts?
No, I don't know that I had anything to add to that.
All right.
Good thoughts.
Okay. Gentlemen, I've kept you a while, but I really thank you for your time, and I'm sure our audience does as well. Thank you so much, guys, for giving me your insights here. I really appreciate it. And hopefully maybe we can have you guys back again sometime. Trey, thank you so much, Trey.
Thanks, Dave.
Brandon,
great to be here.
Thank you. Brandon, great of you to join us as well.
Thanks, Mr. Mathlin. It was awesome.
Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us for another episode, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Grumpy Old Man podcast. Be sure to come back for more episodes and to check out his companion blog, astickthemud.com.